Hello, I'm David Duke. Do Zionists really control Wall Street? An op-ed piece in Digital Journal just headlined, quote, David Duke's most unlikely supporter. It refers to a popular video showing a well-spoken African-American woman teacher at an Occupy Wall Street rally. Her name is Patricia McAllister. Here's the clip.
I think that the Zionist Jews who are running these big banks in our Federal Reserve, which is not run by the federal government, they need to be run out of this country.
She's been called anti-Semitic, but notice she did not condemn all Jews. She specifically talked about the Zionists in the big banks and the Federal Reserve who are robbing America blind. You can watch the whole segment on YouTube. Actually, she's a moderate. I and millions of other Americans think that these criminals who have stolen billions from us in these robber banks should not be run out. They should be run into prison. They should be treated just like Zionist Bernie Madoff was, tried in a court of law, and put into prison where they belong. The op-ed writer goes on to say, so do Zionist Jews control America's banks? Another person who thinks so is David Duke. This charismatic Klansman turned anti-war activist has even published a book called Jewish Supremacism, in which he makes out a strong case for Jewish influences throughout America. Read my book. You'll find out it's a heck of a strong case. The op-ed writer then tells us that Zionist Jews don't have disproportionate influence on Wall Street. Now, what's his proof? He quotes a book written by a Zionist called Jews and Money, The Myths and the Reality. Gerald Krefetz points out that a 1922 study found 22 Jews in a survey of 151 millionaires, including 7 Guggenheims. Unquote. Wow. This is the best proof he has that Zionists don't control Wall Street, a survey done in 1922. Now, what are the true facts? Are Patricia and I wrong in saying that Zionists control Wall Street? Well, let's start with the most powerful Wall Street predator bank in the world, and that, of course, is Goldman Sachs. Actually, Goldman Sachs is not run by Mr. Blankfein, but by a good old country boy from Bunkie, Louisiana named Orville Pratt. No, just kidding. It's Mr. Blankfein, all right. And who's his second in command? Well, it's Mr. Con. Appropriate name for a con man. They're not Baptists. They're Zionists. Now, why are they smiling in this photo? Maybe it's because they just stole $500 billion. The fact is that Goldman Sachs, just like its name suggests, is a Zionist operation that goes back decades. And the Zionist robber bank also happens to be the largest corporate campaign contributor to Barack Obama. In addition, Goldman Sachs criminals are repeatedly appointed to the highest positions in the Treasury and other financial departments of our United States government. The second most powerful bank, until very recently, was Lehman Brothers Bank under Zionist Richard Fuld. The struggle between Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers for being top of the pile were exactly like gangster turf wars. You also have some pretty famous Zionist fraudsters like Bernie Madoff. The investigators wiretapped Bernie, and they record his wife as saying that all of Bernie's troubles came from us Gentiles.
Ruth would talk about the Gentiles being responsible for this, and Bernie, told that one of his victims had committed suicide, Madoff's reaction was, well, that guy couldn't pick a stock if his life depended on it. It was almost as if he blamed the victim. He's weak.
Now, Bernie stole a measly $55 billion. Many good people heap blame on the Security Exchange Commission regulators because their job is to police the robber banks like Goldman Sachs and the less elegant thieves like Bernie Madoff. But guess who's head of the SEC? As Gomer Pyle used to say, surprise, surprise. It's none other than Shapiro. And please, don't forget the biggest robber bank of them all, the Federal Reserve Bank. For almost a century, it has been under the control of an elite set of Zionist bankers. For the last 25 years, it has been run by Alan Greenspan, and since 2005 by Ben Shalom Bernanke. And that's his real name, his actual middle name, Shalom. The vice chairman since 2005 was Donald Cohn, who was more recently replaced by Janet Yellen. Greenspan, Bernanke, Cohn, Yellen. Now, can you guess what they all have in common? Shalom to Patricia again, because she's right on the Fed. And what else did Patricia say?
A Federal Reserve, which is not run by the federal government.
Is Patricia full of beans? Well, listen to what the Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan has to say about who controls the Federal Reserve. Here he is on PBS with Jim Lehrer.
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
So, my friends, the Federal Reserve Bank, which prints our money, sets interest rates, and doles out trillions to the banksters, does not even have to do what our elected president wants. Doesn't even have to do what our elected Congress wants. Of course, the PBS interviewer does not see any problem that our own people's own currency is not even controlled by the American people, nor that, in effect, they can tax you and all of us by simply printing money and giving it to their fellow criminals, which makes the value of your money drop like a huge tax. It's actually nothing but a massive criminal theft. In fact, the interviewer and Greenspan were laughing how President George Bush Sr. blamed Greenspan for his election loss because Greenspan didn't loosen interest rates and thus help the economy. What they didn't tell you on PBS is that Greenspan is an ardent Zionist, and that the Zionists saw George Bush Sr. as a big enemy because he demanded Israel stop stealing Palestinian land on the West Bank. Of course, most Americans have no idea that the executive producers of the news at PBS have been a long line of Zionists such as Les Crystal, just like at the other TV networks. And it's not just PBS. It's the same in the rest of the broadcast media. Check out the documentation in my books. And now we learn from Mr. Neil Barofsky of the Treasury Department, whose officials have been populated for years by Goldman Sachs graduates. He says that the real bailouts for these criminal banks is not $7 trillion, but $23.7 trillion. Here's the article from Bloomberg on the real size of the bailout. Quote, July 20. U.S. taxpayers may be on the hook for as much as $23.7 trillion to bolster the economy and bail out financial companies, said Neil Barofsky, Special Inspector General for the Treasury's Troubled Asset Relief Program, unquote. Now, what's that guy's name again? Barofsky. Oh, yeah. He's the wolf who's going to protect us chickens from the wolf banks who are going to pluck us. Boy, they're everywhere. Strange, do you remember any vote on stealing $23 trillion from you and your children to give to the Zionist robber banks? But don't worry. Bloomberg and the rest of the Zionist media will tell us how necessary it is to put our children and grandchildren in bondage to these Zionist banksters forever. The Fed not only directly controls the economy of the United States, but much of the world. The two most powerful economic superbanks next to the Fed are the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. In the last few years, the most famous controllers of these institutions have been the Zionist extremist Strauss-Kahn and Zionist warmonger Paul Wolfowitz, and those board meetings of those groups look like Woody Allen look-alike contests. Patricia's attacked for saying Zionists control Wall Street, but Zionist talk show host Bob Handel of KFI, L.A., recently bragged about the control of Wall Street by, quote, my tribe.
This is my tribe who control Wall Street. Why would I be upset?
Right after she said the truth about the Zionist control of Wall Street, it was called Myths and Lies. Patricia was fired as a teacher. Even the Zionist-owned Los Angeles Times approved of her being fired for voicing her political opinion off the job. But Handel, a Zionist talk show host who says he supports Wall Street because, quote, it's my tribe, still spews the filth every day over the airways without a peep of protest for the Los Angeles Times, and Handel wasn't fired. Here's some things that I believe in and things that I believe every race, every heritage on earth can believe in. One, that we must break the Zionist control of Wall Street and the Federal Reserve, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Two, that we must break their influence over media from New York to Washington and Hollywood and London and Paris. Three, we must break their inordinate influence over politics in America and around the Western world. Four, that Zionism is not simply a problem for the Palestinians and other Mideast peoples, but a huge problem for America and the world. 5. We must end these insane wars for Israel that have lost or damaged the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans and lost or damaged the lives of millions of people overseas, that have cost Americans trillions of dollars and made Americans less safe and less free rather than more safe and more free. 6. We must overturn the Zionist matrix of power, the finance, media, and political influence, and each part of this tri-headed matrix that supports each other. 7. We must break Zionist-driven globalism that is destroying freedom and independence of every people, that is destroying our heritage, our health, our food, our environment, the ecology of this planet, and even the unique qualities that constitute the beauty and diversity of mankind itself. It's time to stand up. We're the vast majority. It's time to occupy Wall Street. It's time to occupy Washington, D.C., and occupy the corporate offices of the controlled media of ABC and CBS and NBC, Fox News, CNN, PBS, and the New York Times. It's time to flush out the sewers of Hollywood. It's time to save America. It's time to stop Zionist-driven globalism in its tracks. It's time to do this for the sake of Patricia McAllister, the sake of my kids and grandkids, and for the sake of your kids. The day of deliverance is coming. Keep the faith and keep on telling the truth, just like the courageous Patricia McAllister. One day we'll be in the streets with numbers so big that the world will change forever. That's the day that I live for, the day I pray for. I'm doing everything I can to make that day come soon, and now it is your turn.